Hi everyone, welcome to Bonnie Carol Lee Makes Cards. I've made another card using Alex Syberia's new February release featuring Clematis. I will be coloring this beautiful image using Magello Mission Gold watercolors. For time's sake, this video will only focus on the coloring of the purple Clematis. The blue flower, of course, is colored in exactly the same way. I begin my painting by loosely laying down color over the center of the flowers, the blooms, and the leaves. I'm using a wet-on-wet technique, wetting the paper before I lay down the color. Because my paper is warping from all the water, I simply wet the back of it and it will lay flat on my surface. As I drop in the color, I let it spill out into the background. To begin, I use bright clear violet for my purple, peacock blue, and sap green on the leaves. Next, I'm going to add some Nuvo Shimmer powder, Lilac Waterfall. When working with these pigments, definitely less is more. These powders are very concentrated, and if you add too much at once, you can end up with a hot mess. Lilac Waterfall adds some additional depth to the painting with its rose, blue, and purple tones. As the powder is applied, I tap on some water with my water brush. It releases just enough water to activate the powder. After everything is dried, I go in with bright clear violet and add some shadow areas to the purple Clematis. Individual petals are painted by first applying water and then dropping in color directly from the block at the base of the petal. With just water on my brush, I draw the color up into the petal, softening as I get closer to the petal tip. By softening, I mean I add in a bit more water so that the color is less saturated. This process of starting off the block at the base of the petal and drawing that color up using water to soften it as we get to the tip of the petal helps to create some nice shadow areas and highlights. When working on the petals, I skip around the flower, making sure that I'm only painting petals that are not adjacent to another petal that is still wet. I make sure that a petal is completely dry by touching it. If it is cool to the touch, it is still damp, and I leave it alone until it is room temperature. When my petal is completely dry, then I can go ahead and paint the petal that is next to it. If I didn't do this, the paint would flow into the next petal and I would lose my highlight areas. It is the wetness of the petal that contains the paint. To begin, when I put water on the petal, I just make sure that I have a nice sheen in that area. You don't want too much water. If too much water is applied, you can always take your brush dried off and lay it in that area, and it will help absorb the extra moisture. With practice, you soon figure out what works best for you. I tend to reach for my number 8 brush when I watercolor. I find it is big enough for working in the larger areas of the petal, and yet if I apply less pressure, I can get into tight areas as well. After the Clematis is completely painted and dried, I go in and deepen some of those shadow areas, again working directly off the block. The blue flower is painted exactly the same way using peacock blue. For the leaves, I bring in a darker green, olive green, to create my shadow areas. I begin, as I did with the flower petals, by first applying a thin layer of water. Olive green is dropped in at the base of the leaf and drawn up along the bottom of the leaf. To add some visual interest to the leaves, I also drop in permanent rose here and there and blend it out into the green. As I work on the individual leaves, I let them dry before I work on the leaf that is next to it. When I am working on a watercolor, if I don't have a lot of time, I will go in with my heat gun and dry areas. Typically though, I just let it air dry, and I always have lots of other things that I can do around the house, like walk the dog. When my painting is completely dry, I apply some splatter. The smaller the brush, the finer the specks of color. I apply both Peacock Blue and Bright Clear Violet. I decided to heat emboss my sentiment, thinking of you, so that it really stands out on the card. Particularly because I am using black embossing powder, I make sure that I use my anti-static powder tool before I apply Versamark ink. The sentiment is embossed twice. The result is a nice puffy dimensional sentiment. I'm going to attach my watercolor panel to sheet foam. Because my panel is quite warped, the sheet foam will help flatten it out. I finish up in the flower center with a zig marker, dark oatmeal. Creating some shadows in this area helps create more dimension. That completes this card using Syberia Designs Clematis. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy day to watch this video.